With SpaceX's first ever earnings call this week, Elon claimed the heat shield problem with Starship has been solved. But after seeing some tiles missing on Ship 40, is that really the case? He also claimed that just a year from now, Starship will be flying once per day. It's a pretty bold claim. Ship 40 is also still afloat in the Indian Ocean as recovery efforts continue after Flight 13. And the mysterious Ship 43.1 nose cone has gone to Massey's for structural testing ahead of a possible ship catch on Flight 14. From Florida Space Coast to South Texas, we have all of that coming up and more on this week's Starship Update. Starting this week off at the production site, inside Gigabay 2, SpaceX is hard at work getting Ship 42 ready for cryo testing after all of its barrel sections have been stacked. Now, while the forward flaps were already installed inside Starfactory, the aft flaps have yet to be installed. However, we did notice that one of the aft flaps was sitting behind the ship. This allowed one of our photographers at Starbase to capture it. While the door being open here gives us limited views of Ship 42, we can see only a few patches of missing tiles. This is a big difference between version 2 and version 3, as version 2 rolled out of Starfactory with a lot of missing tiles. I mean, it was basically naked. Now, a big part of that can be attributed to SpaceX performing a lot of tile testing, including the likes of those with experimental purposes, like metallic tiles and the actively cooled tiles as well. But it is really nice to see that we have mostly tiled ship sections now coming out of Starfactory. As Ship 42 is already being prepared for cryo testing, its likely companion, Booster 22, recently had its final methane barrel section rolled out to Gigabay 1. With the methane tank complete, SpaceX rolls out the LOX tank installation jig from Starfactory to transfer the methane tank from the bridge cranes and stack it onto the LOX tank itself. And voila, you have yourself a fully stacked booster. Just like Ship 42 though, the work does not stop when completing the last welds on the barrel sections. SpaceX still needs to install the autogenous pressurization plumbing for the LOX and methane tanks. These will help keep the tanks pressurized as propellant empties during flight by backfilling them with some of the combustion gas byproducts from the Raptor engines. Remember back all the way to Flight 2 when Booster 9 blew up during its boost back burn, partially due to a filter blockage inside the LOX tank? That blockage was the result of carbon dioxide freezing at the temperatures inside the tank. SpaceX saw this issue with better LOX tank filters going forward. Various other works of plumbing need to be connected inside the booster as well. Workers have to climb inside through access hatches to perform the work needed. And the same goes for the electrical systems as well. When everything is connected, SpaceX also conducts a small-scale leak check inside Gigabay 1. While the pressure is a lot lower compared to, say, an ambient pressure test at Massey's, it still helps to find leaks to be dealt with early on before the booster leaves for further testing. And speaking of vehicle production, let's go ahead and move inside Starfactory. Ship 43 has turned around, with the non-heat shield side now facing the window. The first hint of SpaceX getting ready to roll Ship 43 out to Gigabay 2 is when we see the PEZ dispenser rolling out first. The PEZ dispenser is then placed onto a turntable where SpaceX will lift the nose cone onto it and weld it into place before stacking the rest of the vehicle. Last week we saw a nose cone was sitting in the tile installation area inside Starfactory. Checking in on the same nose cone this week, we can see that SpaceX got right to business installing most of the required pins. The station next to this nose cone is where SpaceX will be installing the tiles themselves, a very time and labor intensive process. Automating this whole process will help SpaceX increase its rate of ship production in the future. The next mostly complete nose cone beside it could be Ship 44. Even though we haven't seen the original Ship 44 in basically a year now, it's not too far-fetched to think that SpaceX moved that name to a different ship. Under this assumption, the nose cone receiving tile pins could be Ship 45. There is also the other nose cone that has received a few white tiles already, but we believe it could be another test article instead of flight hardware. But to know for sure, we have to wait for them to all roll out of Starfactory and see if any labels are visible. With hardware production really picking up, SpaceX is pushing right along with completing Gigabay at Starbase as quickly as possible. It will eventually be used for vehicle stacking and refurbishment. This week, we can see that SpaceX installed struts on the roof's backside. As work on its outer sides comes to an end, SpaceX will dismantle the tower cranes and finish up the outer walls and panels. Up next is kitting it out with bridge cranes that will lift barrel sections, nose cones, and completed vehicles. Turntables and workstations will also be installed here as well. The bridge crane will place barrel sections onto the turntables, where they will then be welded to whatever needs to be in the process. When a vehicle is fully welded together, the bridge crane will then pick it up and transfer it to a different work stand for further processing. This is similar to what's happening with boosters and ships right now inside their respective megabays, but Gigabay will have much more room to accommodate more turntables, taller vehicles, and more workstations, allowing more vehicles to be worked on at the same time. Now on to some bigger news. SpaceX's first ever earnings call since going public took place this week. There, Elon Musk noted that the company intends to send Ship 41 to an operational orbit on Flight 14 and deploy operational Starlink V3 satellites. It's a pretty big milestone. This follows on from Flight 13, where 20 suborbital V3 satellites were flown and deployed, 6 of them using their onboard cameras to image Starship during its coast phase. Starship going orbital is imperative for this program, with operational missions relying on this capability to deploy actual payloads, not to mention other critical mission criteria such as HLS for the Artemis program. This will also dramatically lower the cost for Starship to access space. To access true reusability, the vehicle has to reach orbit, re-enter Earth's atmosphere, and be recovered by the tower's chopsticks before it can be turned around to fly again. This milestone will greatly push Starship in the direction of operational maturity and deploying customer payloads hopefully in the next year. Once Starship is fully operational, Falcon 9's days are numbered, because as we all know, Starship's payload capacity dwarfs any existing payload delivered by Falcon 9 at this point. This is all by design though. Falcon was never meant to last forever, and Starship has been SpaceX's long-term vision for many, many years now in one form or another, whether it be ITS, BFR, or now as we know it, Starship. Musk also reaffirmed that if the required FAA paperwork is complete in time, the company could attempt its first ship catch on Flight 14. Following the highly successful performance of the first 2 version 3 Starship flights, the tone of the call was extremely optimistic, with the company announcing they could expect to catch the first version 3 ship and booster by the end of 2026. I'm not so sure any of us saw this coming so soon, especially considering how different version 3's start to life has been compared to version 2. And we're all still kind of scarred. But SpaceX really does need to move fast here to meet both their commitments to the Artemis program and their own flight cadence goals. Elon also noted that by the end of next year, the company has the goal of 1 Starship flight per day, which would certainly be a massive increase over its current cadence. Whether or not this happens remains to be seen. However, with 3 launch pads likely to be online by the end of next year, and the reuse of both stages in play by then, a much higher cadence can be expected. This, however, is a very, very ambitious goal, because if you want to launch Starship once per day, you need the propellant to launch Starship once per day. And even though SpaceX is constructing their own air separation unit in Starbase, this has the capability of generating 1 flight's worth of commodities in 2 to 3 days. Now, it's not impossible by any means for SpaceX to supply all 3 launch sites, but reaching that goal by the end of next year seems like a stretch right now. Starship is still in testing after all, and no rocket in history has ever flown at this cadence. But with version 3, we may have to expect the unexpected. And with that kind of cadence in a vehicle as complex as Starship is, unforeseen issues are inevitable. It's up to SpaceX to find them and solve them. Another major highlight during the call was the impressive robustness of the heat shield during Flight 13. As of recording, Ship 40 is still afloat in the Indian Ocean with a full recovery team. The likes of the Norman Ranger and Skimmer Tide are actively towing the vehicle back from deep waters to Western Australia to undergo analysis. Having a full ship return from orbit to be analyzed is immense for the company and proven to be invaluable. Ship 40 was also the first to not blow up after landing, so it's a really big deal. SpaceX can closely inspect each tile to examine the fiberglass fibers and confirm if the insulation and structural strength of the tiles are good enough for reuse. And at least upon our visual inspections, the heat shield looks great. And speaking of the heat shield, Elon himself said that he sees the heat shield problem with Starship as solved, though they will make improvements if needed in the future. Although we saw some missing and even broken tiles after re-entry on Flight 13, SpaceX has far more detailed data to properly analyze for the heat shield's performance. The optimism here is certainly encouraging, and the heat shield has visually improved with each ship coming out of Gigabay 2. The amount of damaged tiles seems minimal here, and with Starship still being in its testing phase, there is no doubt that SpaceX will refine the heat shield to have little or no damage. SpaceX later posted new images of Ship 40's recovery effort, showing that it's being supported by fenders. However, Elon replied saying the recovery effort right now is not looking so good due to incoming rough seas. But SpaceX did obtain close-up photos of critical regions of the heat shield and engines for future upgrades. We will have to hold our breath and see if Ship 40 makes it to shore. We sure hope it does. With Flight 14 now on the horizon, SpaceX continues to work on Pad 2's chopsticks and the launch mount. Significant grinding work has been observed on the tower's chopsticks, and the left stick's landing rail has been raised. The rails themselves act as a cushion for a booster or ship coming in for landing on their catch points. Work to modify Pad 1 is also moving very quickly. The flame diverter support beam has arrived, the piece that will support both flame buckets, which are currently under construction at Sanchez, and the ridge cap. The walls of the trench are also being joined together before being lifted into the trench. Handling a launch vehicle of this size and power requires significant infrastructure. The flame diverter itself is used to divert the superheated, high-pressure exhaust gases from the Super Heavy booster sideways and away from the pad itself, limiting any damage to Starship and the pad itself and its surrounding infrastructure. That said, Pad 1 is still some time away from returning to service. Key elements like the orbital launch mount have yet to be built, and a lot of work remains on other critical systems. To help with construction, SpaceX has raised its LR-11000 crane for the first time this year. While it was down, the company disassembled it for overdue maintenance. The salty air Starbase is tough on all equipment. This was its first major service since SpaceX bought the crane. Multiple parts have arrived in recent weeks, including the crane hook this week. 3 days after that, the crane was raised again. It's not in the exact configuration we're used to, but it's ready to get back to work in Starbase. Work is also continuing on the site's air separation unit. With the compressor stage of the unit already having received its metal housing, it's now time for the water-cooled element to receive its own. With the compressor stage running, it generates a lot of heat, but the water cooling station is not used to cool the compressors themselves. For that, they will have to make do with the HVAC system for cooling. The water cooling station will supply cooling water to the unit that cools the compressed air coming from the compressor. It's kind of a mouthful to say. Now, because air is a mixture of gases, mainly nitrogen and oxygen, it doesn't liquefy at a single temperature. Oxygen turns to liquid first at minus 183 degrees Celsius, while nitrogen needs minus 196 degrees Celsius. SpaceX can exploit that difference to separate the two. But even after separation, the oxygen still needs further purification before it can be used to fuel Starship or subcool propellants. Once purified, it'll be transferred to the tank farm, which is about to get more storage capacity. This week, we spotted 2 new storage tanks arriving at the Port of Brownsville. Metal structures have also arrived from the Cape. We'll have to wait and see what those are for. Here on the Space Coast, the Starship facility at Launch Complex 39A is getting closer to a potential launch in the coming months. And there was plenty of activity this week. On August 3rd, the tower chopsticks really woke up. The left stick closed 12 times, and the right stick moved the following day as well. This was likely testing ahead of the first Starship vehicles arriving at the Cape. But after testing, SpaceX removed the left chopstick actuator. The reason isn't clear, but they probably spotted something off nominal during their runs. But they must have fixed it pretty quick, because this past Friday, SpaceX began weight testing the chopsticks with the famous water-filled bags. We've seen this before at both Starbase pads, and we'll likely see them again at Space Launch Complex 37's facilities. While the LR-11000 crane at Starbase was raised this week, the one at Pad A has now been lowered. Its primary construction tasks appear to be finished, as Florida's first Starship pad moves toward operational status. Finally, looking at the orbital launch mount, the middle section of the booster quick disconnect hood was installed this week. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. It's still hard to judge exactly how close the orbital launch mount is to readiness though, but progress is steady. So I'm going to ask you guys again, when's Starship from Florida? Let us know in the comment section down below. And now finally, on to Massey's. More modifications to the Super Crusher were observed this week. Last week, we saw the grid fin motor testing jig was moved to Massey's to test the grid fin motors for the test tank B18.3. While this jig hasn't been installed quite yet, SpaceX did lift 2 chopstick simulators into the Super Crusher this week. Version 3 boosters changed much more than just the number of grid fins. They now have 3 larger fins instead of 4. The 2 side fins that control pitch and roll are also the integrated lift and catch points for boosters now. Those points have already been used to lift vehicles onto Pad 2, but they still haven't been tested for an actual chopstick catch. Hopefully we'll see that after Booster 21 completes a successful landing burn in the Gulf. There, the booster is initially expected to light its inner 13 engines, and then down to 5 engines for the final phase of landing. And then, hopefully catch. And you can commemorate the 13-engine landing burn with our Flight 13 patch and pins, which are now shipping from our warehouse. Go ahead and scoop them up over at shop.NASASpaceflight.com. The middle grid fin, which controls yaw, does not have any lifting points because it never interacts with the chopsticks. That means it won't get a chopstick simulator, but it still needs to be tested on the grid fin motor testing jig to simulate loads. The fin itself steers the booster during atmospheric re-entry, and eventually back to the tower for recovery. But that isn't the only hardware heading to Massey's this week for testing. This week, the mysterious test nosecone Ship 43.1 rolled out for its own campaign. The first nosecone tested here since SN12, way before even Flight 1 left the ground. It was then lifted into the supercrusher on Friday afternoon. Don't expect too much frost during its test though. Unlike previous test tanks, this nosecone has holes in the side and an attachment point at the tip so SpaceX can mount the actuators and apply loads to the header tanks. It also includes landing pins for future catches. Now, because of the strong performances over the last few flights, there is a real possibility SpaceX could attempt an actual tower landing at Starbase with Ship 41. Speaking of timing, a high-profile mission slide from Kadena suggested Booster 21 and Ship 41 could launch on August 28th. Flight 14 might therefore happen near the end of this month. That said though, both vehicles are still in their respective bays preparing for their own static fires, so a lot could still change. Take that date with a Starship-sized grain of salt. Last week, the same source was pointing towards August 20th. With Flight 14 potentially happening at the end of this month, and SpaceX testing critical pieces of hardware for a potential ship catch, do you think SpaceX will be ready in time? Will they really attempt to catch ship on Flight 14? And how do you think the heat shield of Ship 41 will look after re-entry? Let us all know in the comments section down below. I'm Max Evans from NASASpaceflight. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch y'all next time.